From Pacifica, this is Democracy Now! Crackdown in Syria. At least 15 people are dead after Syrian soldiers raid a mosque on Wednesday. Rights groups report mass arrests and deserted streets in the southern city of Daraa. We go to Damascus to speak with the longtime Syrian human rights activist Haytham Mallah. He's 80 years old and once again just out of prison. We'll also speak with his son in Dallas. Then we turn to Japan, where officials have warned of dangerous radiation levels in water as far south as Tokyo, more than 100 miles from the Fukushima nuclear reactor.
Although the government says don't let infants drink it, you won't find uncontaminated water out there. They are all sold out.
And we'll speak with journalist Alan Nairn about President Obama's Latin American trip this week. In Chile, he was asked if he would apologize for past U.S. support for Chilean dictator General Augusto Pinochet. Obama did not quite answer the question.
Even as we understand our history and gain clarity about our history, and we're not trapped by our history. And the fact of the matter is that over the last 2 decades, we've seen extraordinary progress here in Chile, and that has not been impeded by the United States, but in fact has been fully supported by the United States.
And it was 31 years ago today. The Salvadoran Archbishop Oscar Romero was gunned down by U.S.-trained forces in El Salvador. President Obama visited his grave. All that and more coming up. Welcome to Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. Reports of civilian casualties are mounting in Libya amidst ongoing U.S.-led airstrikes and the Gaddafi regime's assault on 3 rebel-held towns. At least 16 civilians were reportedly killed after Gaddafi forces resumed an attack on the coastal city of Misrata, shelling an area around the city's main hospital. The Gaddafi regime, meanwhile, has attempted to provide the first evidence of repeated claims of civilian deaths in U.S.-led airstrikes. Earlier today, Libyan officials showed journalists the bodies of 18 people it said were military personnel and civilians killed in a Western bombing. The claim could not be independently verified. Libya's Deputy Foreign Minister Khalid Haim called for an end to the airstrikes.
The airstrikes, as what happened today, didn't differentiate between the civilians or the armed personnel. To start up the national dialogue and get life back to normal, the airstrikes should stop immediately.
Aid groups are preparing for a humanitarian emergency in Misrata as the Gaddafi regime's attacks intensify. The city's main hospital is said to be overrun with patients and is running low on supplies. The UN humanitarian coordinator for Libya, Rashid Khalakov, warned civilians are facing growing danger.
Extremely concerned about impact on civilians of the ongoing conflict. And I think one has to understand the humanitarian situation that is not only limited to the requirements in emergency food aid or water supplies or medication supplies or shelter. It's also protection of people who find themselves in the middle of crossfire.
Japan is facing shortages of bottled water after dangerous radiation levels were detected in water supplies in Tokyo and other areas. Store shelves were empty across Tokyo after Japanese authorities warned tap water is too dangerous for consumption by infants. Thousands of people remain without water in areas of northern Japan ravaged by the earthquake and tsunami. James Lyons of the International Atomic Energy Agency said radiation levels around the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear plant could be on the decline.
More data has become available from the Japanese authorities, and their measurements indicate that the radiation dose rates at the Daiichi site are decreasing. There are some positive indications on the site. Precautionary restrictions around the site on certain foodstuffs have been put in place. And monitoring of the environment continues to expand beyond the evacuation zone and out to sea. Overall, no significant risk to human health has been identified.
Despite the apparent improvements, the IAEA has warned Japanese officials continue to withhold crucial data, including the temperatures of spent fuel pools at the plant's reactors. The toll of the death or missing in Japan, meanwhile, has topped 26,000. We'll have more on Japan later in the broadcast. The death toll from a Syrian government crackdown on opposition protesters continues to rise. At least 15 people were killed Wednesday when forces raided a mosque housing protesters in the early morning hours, but there have been reports the death toll may be significantly higher. Amnesty International is reporting the Syrian government has swept up dissident students, intellectuals, journalists and activists over the past several weeks. We'll have more on Syria after headlines. The Israeli military has launched new airstrikes on the Gaza Strip after the bombing of a bus stop in Jerusalem. Israeli warplanes hit smuggling tunnels along the Gaza-Egypt border, as well as a training camp linked to the Palestinian group Hamas. A power transformer was also hit, causing blackouts. The strikes come after one person was killed and over 30 wounded when a bomb exploded at a bus stop in Jerusalem Wednesday. An Israeli police spokesperson announced the attack.
The explosion took place at the bus stop. All the people that were injured, 24 people were injured at the site itself, directly from the explosion. Immediately, our units and emergency teams arrived at the scene. 3 people have been injured seriously, 4 moderately, and all the rest lightly.
The Palestinian Authority immediately condemned the bombing and warned Israel could exploit it to strengthen the occupation of Palestinian land.
The Palestinian Authority has condemned this explosion in Jerusalem and explained that all kinds of violent activities, regardless of the victims, do not serve the Palestinian cause, but rather is used as an excuse by the Israeli right-wing government in order to further pursue their agendas.
The Jerusalem bus bombing came one day after Israeli strikes killed 8 people in Gaza, including 4 civilians, a grandfather, and 3 teenage boys. Another 10 Palestinians were wounded, including children, some of them seriously. The Obama administration's condemned the attack on Israeli civilians, but has rejected a similar stance on Israel's deadlier attacks on Palestinian civilians. In Washington, Secretary of State Hillary Clinton criticized Palestinian militants for, quote, terrorism and targeting of civilians. But when it came to Palestinian civilian deaths by the U.S. armed Israeli military, Clinton said only that the U.S. extends, quote, sincere condolences.
The United States is committed to Israel's security, and we strongly condemn this violence and extend our deepest sympathies to all those affected. We also strongly condemn recent rocket attacks from Gaza against innocent Israeli civilians and hold fully responsible the militants perpetrating these attacks. And I join President Obama in extending our sincere condolences to the friends and families of the Palestinian civilians killed in Gaza yesterday, and appreciate that Israel has expressed regret.
Embattled U.S.-backed Yemeni President Ali Abdullah Saleh has enacted sweeping emergency powers amidst a growing uprising against his 30-year rule. On Wednesday, Yemen's parliament approved the implementation of emergency laws suspending the constitution, barring protests, allowing far-reaching media censorship, and handing more authority to state forces. Just over half of Yemen's 301 parliament members were present for the vote. Thousands of people remain in the streets of Yemen in defiance of the new laws. A U.S. soldier has been sentenced to 24 years in prison with an earlier possibility of parole after pleading guilty to murdering 3 Afghan civilians. Jeremy Morlock is one of 12 alleged members of a secret kill team that murdered unarmed Afghan civilians at random and collected body parts such as fingers for trophies. Morlock entered a guilty plea Wednesday under a deal with prosecutors that will see him testify against other accused soldiers. He will be eligible for release after 7 years under the terms of the plea bargain. Leaked photos published this week show Morlock grinning as he poses with the bloodied and partially naked corpse of one of his victims. Prosecutors say Morlock acted as the right-hand man to accused ringleader Staff Sergeant Calvin Gibbs. A federal appeals court rejected an attempt to suspend California's ban on gay marriage while it's challenged in court. The ban was approved in 2008 when California voters passed the initiative known as Proposition 8. But last year, U.S. District Judge Vaughn Walker ruled it was unconstitutional. The judge's decision has been put on hold pending an appeal to the Ninth Circuit U.S. Court of Appeals. Gay rights advocates, along with California's Attorney General, had requested gay marriages be allowed to proceed while the appeal is underway. Democratic Congressmember Jerry Nadler of New York's announced plans to reintroduce a measure that would defend binational gay and lesbian couples whose partnerships are threatened by deportations. The Uniting American Families Act would seek to provide immigration equality to binational same-sex couples. Nadler's plan follows a New York judge's decision to halt deportation hearings that would have separated a citizen of Argentina, from her American wife. The judge's decision marks the first time a married same-sex couple has successfully halted a pending deportation based on the Obama administration's decision to no longer defend the Defense of Marriage Act. A group of House Republicans is quietly pushing a measure that would deny food stamps to any household with a family member involved in a workplace strike. According to the website Think Progress, House Resolution 1135 would bar food stamps to any family where one adult member is involved in a strike against an employer. And the civil rights attorney Leonard Weinglass has died. In a career spanning 4 decades, Lenny Weinglass took on cases including the Chicago 8 anti-war protesters at the 1968 Democratic Convention, the Pentagon Papers whistleblower Daniel Ellsberg, Philadelphia death row prisoner Mumia Abu-Jamal, and the Cuban Five. Weinglass discussed the Cuban Five on Democracy Now! In 2007.
This was a very unique case, Juan. This is the first time in our history that there's been an espionage charge, conspiracy to commit espionage. The government admitted they could not prove espionage. But even conspiracy to commit espionage, there wasn't a single page of classified document involved in this case. That never happened before. Furthermore, the defense was able to call General Atkinson, General Wilhelm, Admiral Carroll, the advisor to the President of the United States on Cuba, all as witnesses for the defense. That never happened before in an espionage case.
Who are these men? And explain why they came here.
These are 5 Cuban men who were employees of the Cuban government. After a series of bombing attacks on Cuba in the early 90s, a hotel was bombed, an Italian tourist was killed, the airport was bombed, tourist buses were bombed. Cuba protested each and every act. The United States did nothing. Cuba then invited the FBI to come to Havana, and they did go, a delegation. They provided them with names and places and people who were engaged in this kind of violence. Again, the government did nothing. Then Cuba sent the 5 to infiltrate these groups, monitor their activities, and warn Cuba.
Again, Lenny Weinglass, age 78, died of cancer. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman with Juan Gonzalez.
And welcome to all of our listeners and viewers around the country and around the world.